More than a couple of hundred bills take effect January 1st, and one of them we'll highlight is the Safe Gun Storage Act. Welcome in. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop with you each and every weekday morning here for the Center Square. You can get the headlines in your inbox at thecentersquare.com. So one measure that we've watched really closely at the State House during spring session was the Safe Gun Storage Act. And you can go back and watch some of those segments as we aired the debates about this. And during spring session, it's ultimately passed. And the governor signed it over the summer. Well, significant provisions take effect January 1st. And what it does, we hear from U.S. LawShield President Kirk Evans. He's also an attorney, and he discussed with me late last week what this measure ultimately does in the state of Illinois, dealing with liability, safe gun handling, who has to lock their firearms up whenever who's in their house. Here's Kirk Evans.
All right, so Illinois already had a safe gun storage statute. But the new statute makes a whole bunch of changes to that. So we can go sort of one by one through those. So under the old statute, all of the penalties and criminal penalties attached if the firearm was accessible by a child under age 14, that has now been bumped up to under age 18. So it's now going to apply to additional minors. In addition, the old statute had what I call kind of a catch-all exception, which is if the firearm was stored in some otherwise inaccessible place, not known to be readily accessible by children. That has been eliminated. Now, basically, the only way you can store it is in a locked container or on your person where it cannot be accessed by the person under the age of 18. Next, sort of the big one is the statute adds two additional categories of folks who you can't allow access to firearms, and those are at-risk persons and prohibited persons. So at-risk persons are defined as folks who have either through their actions or their words indicated that they might harm themselves or others or commit suicide. Obviously, somebody who does a social media post that says they're going to kill themselves or something, that's an obvious one. But by actions that are not spelled out by words, that's very, very difficult to interpret. Going to be a tough one for the courts and for folks to figure out. And prohibited persons, so that's a prohibited person under either federal or state law from possessing firearms. So think convicted felons, serious domestic violence, things like that. Folks who are not allowed to have firearms under existing law. Can't have those folks accessing the firearms either. So with that being the new statute, they've also added some new civil penalties. It is already a crime under Illinois law. The first time this happens, it's a Class C misdemeanor, which is up to 30 days in jail and up to $1,000 fine. In addition, if it happens more than once, it's a Class A misdemeanor, which is up to a year in prison and a $2,500 fine. That's the penalty before, and that's the penalty under the new statute. But the new statute adds in some civil penalties, which is just tacked on money. If you violate the statute, but really nothing bad happens, just say somebody reports you or a neighbor, sees this or a housekeeper or something like that, it's a additional civil penalty of $500. If a child or at-risk or prohibited person gets a hold of the firearm, but nothing bad happens with it, then it's a civil penalty of $1,000. And then if a child, at-risk person, prohibited person gets a hold of the firearm and then does something terrible with it, serious bodily injury, death, something like that, the civil penalty can go up as high as $10,000. So those are all of the new changes to the Storage Act.
Pretty thorough from Kirk Evans on the measure that, again, passed in spring session, signed in the summer, and going into effect January 1st. Now, some of the criticism about the bill included the issue of, well, how are people at a business or at a home supposed to ultimately determine whether or not there's a prohibited person in their home? So how do you do that? Is that something that you can even possibly do. Here's Kirk Evans again talking about how people are supposed to check ID for people visiting their homes.
But, oh no, it's terrible. And let's just even say the age, the age thing. What if you got a bunch of, college kids over, and you assume they're all above 18, but you have a whiz kid in the group who's 17, and he gets access to, one of the firearms. You're not checking ID at the door. But you're right. The toughest part is it's if you know or reasonably should know. And how in the world are you going to know about someone's criminal history? How are you going to know if they just posted on Facebook that they're going to shoot up a school? It makes it very, very subjective and difficult for individuals to figure out.
Now, obviously, a lot more still about the safe gun storage bill from Kirk Evans here, but we're live here with Illinois in Focus Daily, and we wanted to keep an eye on what's happening with the U.S. Supreme Court and whether or not they're going to take that Cook County gun ban challenge. And just refreshing the order list here that was just released by the U.S. Supreme Court, no Veramonte's case on the order list. So looks like it's going to be relisted yet again. So we'll be keeping an eye on that as well. The Supreme Court apparently has the next couple of weeks off, so we'll have to wait until early next year to find out if they're going to take a gun ban challenge or not, and what that means for the Seventh Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals case in the Barnett challenge, where you have a lower court, the Southern District of Illinois, declaring the law unconstitutional, but plaintiffs there in the state of Illinois and gun owners across the state still in limbo. And even though they have a lower court saying, hey, it's unconstitutional, the appeals court has yet to rule on this. We'll see where that goes. Just wanted to take a brief moment to update you on that here live, as we do each and every weekday morning with Illinois in Focus. Go live. All right, but back to the safe gun storage bill. Kirk Evans talks about a variety of other components of this, and in particular, the liability component here. Another point of criticism that opponents of the bill had, saying that essentially this bill is going to open people up to who are victims of a theft, possibly being charged with some kind of liability if the person who stole their firearm uses it in a crime.
Probably not for that civil penalty. So the general law is if somebody, commits a crime to get your gun and then commits a crime with the gun, technically you are not supposed to be civilly liable for that if you're sued by the injured person. But I think under that new statute, the state is going to be able to get that civil penalty from you. I will say there is one more issue when it comes to civil liability. So the new statute, and I didn't mention it, the new statute says that if you violate this statute, that is prima facie evidence in a civil case that you are liable civilly. And that's just a fancy term for, hey, if you violate the statute, you're almost automatically liable in a civil case. It can be rebutted, but you're essentially presumed to be liable in a civil context if they violate the statute.
Another major criticism that opponents of the safe gun storage law had when they passed this back in May was this takes away the ability for somebody to properly defend themselves in their own home if they can't have quick access to a firearm, like, for instance, your nightstand next to your bed.
You're right. Makes it very, very difficult. So one of the other exceptions is if you've got the firearm on your person. So I know a lot of people are gun nuts out there, but I don't know anybody that sleeps with the firearm, in their holster while they're sleeping or taking a nap. So if it's not on your person, then you have to have it locked up and securely locked up. And unless you got one of those really fancy ones, that you can get to in the dark without screwing up, you're going to have a difficult time quickly accessing that firearm.
Evans, of course, with U.S. LawShield, talking about some final thoughts on this measure as it's going to go into effect, at least portions of it, come January 1st.
No, that's just the tough one. And combined with, so this is combined with the existing failure to report statute. And then there are new modifications to the failure to report statute. So the difficult part comes when, okay, I'm a victim of a crime, my firearm was stolen. Everybody wants to report when their house has been broken into. But what if you have that question mark, oh my gosh, did I have that gun stored properly What if I didn't have, it was on the table and I've got kids, and so I report this to the police. I want them to investigate the robbery, but basically you're implicating yourself in a crime merely by reporting your stolen firearm.
Thanks to Kirk Evans for chatting with me about that late last week, and glad to bring it to you here with Illinois in Focus.
20 members present. 26 members are needed for quorum pursuant to Rule 3. We cannot undertake any business without a quorum. Can I get a motion? Alderman Irvin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Despite more than half of the council not showing up to work today, I move we adjourn.
All right, well, hearing no objections, so ordered. This meeting is adjourned.
That was the Chicago City Council meeting yesterday as they tried to come into order, but there weren't enough city aldermen there to conduct any business, so they went ahead and adjourned. It is Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Go to thecentersquare.com for the latest and wake up with us here for Illinois in Focus with the Center Square. Why is this important? Because the end of the month is the deadline for the city, state's largest city, to tell its taxpayers how it's going to be spending its money. The taxpayer money. You got a $16+ billion budget that the mayor laid out, and there's $1 billion+ deficits. How is that going to be filled? He wants a head tax. He wants a tax on employees for businesses over 500. That's a modification from what he originally had of taxing businesses per employee if they have more than 100 employees. A lot of pushback from that, including from Illinois Comptroller Susana Mendoza, who could be eyeing a bid for Chicago mayor, critical of the mayor's head tax and talking about the lost tax revenue from big businesses fleeing the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois. So the mayor's been pushing on this, talking about the, quote, progressive revenue, which really just means more tax increases, to fund city priorities like public safety, he says. And he's very adamant about youth jobs and the correlation, he says, is with public safety in that space. So here we are, less than 2 weeks now, and the city of Chicago still doesn't have a budget. They had several meetings and discussions about, proposals, but not really anything coming together as maybe the Chicago taxpayers would like to think. So some of the new proposals includes a liquor tax, a tax on alcohol, and the Hospitality Business Association of Chicago and others held a news conference yesterday. The Center Square's Jim Talamonte was there, and he captured some of their concerns about a proposed tax on alcohol that could possibly be part of a budget for the city of Chicago.
Consumers are stressed, and stressed consumers don't go out, they cut back spending. I can't imagine if you're a stressed consumer and all of a sudden you're hearing and learning that we could potentially be at 13.5% on your grocery card purchase of beer, wine, or spirits, that's going to make you want to go out and buy more. More generally, when the NETA RTA extra sales tax comes in, it's going to be 15% to go out to dinner downtown because we have the McCormick tax on top of that. That's going to be shocking to the casual visitor, but that was how the State House saw fit to go on that. So we are just throwing out revenue ideas that punish the small independents with that cumulative stack of sales taxes.
Part of this budget hole was created, a small part, by the removal of the local grocery tax. What do you think about the council's decision to seemingly forego keeping that while targeting specifically off-premise consumption of alcohol?
I would say that's above my pay grade because that was a political process issue on when they chose to let it get through the State House, where, as far as I know, the city of Chicago didn't even oppose it or ask for a longer phase out. So there was an old dear city council department head named Norma Reyes who always said, don't make your lack of planning my emergency. And that's a lot what this feels like. They knew that grocery tax was going away and there was no chance of passing it at city council. And now we're the life preserver for that lack of foresight. That's not fair to our small independents.
And there's a lot of pushback on this idea from those small independents. Also there was Koval Distillery owner.
This is a city that knows how to be joyous. And part of that is going out and celebrating and enjoying something to drink. And we're proud to make something locally with the farmers' grains of local Illinois. And what that means is this doesn't just affect my business, But like all manufacturing, every dollar that goes into manufacturing is about $2.50 into the local economy. But on the other side of it, it means that there are a lot of other businesses that are local that will also be affected by this. And I can tell you it will also affect local farms that are not going to be able to provide us with the grain that they're growing, because we're going to have to cut back because this is going to affect our sales. And all of this is coming at a time in which our industry is really dealing with a lot of issues. And I know that it's affecting local manufacturers of distilled spirits in Chicago, because a few of these businesses have already scaled back, left the city, or had to close.
So clearly this is going to impact an industry in the city of Chicago if they increase the amount of tax on alcohol sales. And you heard the hospitality group there say that they feel like they're the life preserver for poor political decisions that legislators and city officials have made in the past year. Because of the grocery tax, for instance. I mean, that was a big, long debate, and the millions of dollars that ultimately means local municipalities that benefited from that 1% tax statewide, it's gone away, but they can implement it locally. Chicago, not doing that. So what are they going to do instead? This alcohol tax? The mayor was asked about this yesterday. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, as of course you saw him during the end part of the city council sprint off of the podium. Now, I don't know if it's necessarily a sprint. Maybe that was a wrong characterization, but he then held a media availability yesterday where he was asked about the alcohol tax proposal.
Especially because, you proposed a budget without a grocery tax. Do you think this is in a similar vein regressive?
Well, look, we've already put forth a proposed budget that challenges these corporations, the largest ones, to put more skin in the game. In fact, some of the feedback that we received was that our community safety surcharge, which is an important investment that corporations want us to make, that we did not situate, our calculation around the technical definition of a small business. So we have even expressed and shown a willingness to shift the threshold for businesses that would be brought into this revenue stream. As far as the liquor lobby, I do understand their concern. I'll just put it point blank. As far as the intentions around it, you would have to get that understanding from those who are proposing it. But we do certainly understand their concern.
And the mayor obviously still very much wanting to have his corporate head tax proposal passed, and he was asked and discussed about that a little bit yesterday during the news conference following that council meeting that had to not happen because they didn't have a quorum. Here's the mayor yesterday being asked about the corporate head tax.
Well, I think that the hyper interest of corporations, the corporate head tax has always been the issue, right? So that's not a breaking discovery, but to your frame of your question around ensuring that we have structural revenue sources in place to strengthen the long-term viability of our economy, absolutely. And that's just not my projection or analysis. That includes the analysis of the Civic Federation that understand that, as well as the Civic Committee of the Commercial Club, that in order for us to have a vibrant economy moving forward, the practices that we have implemented over the first couple of years have already put us on a pathway for long-term sustainability.
And very quickly, the Federal Transit Administration wanted your CTA safety plan today.
Again, you've got the mayor being asked about a variety of things, and that question about the transit safety. We're probably going to hear a lot more about that later on today as Governor J.B. Pritzker signs that measure that allows for the Regional Transit Authority to increase taxes on Cook County and surrounding counties to fund mass transit, which has spent a lot of money, especially COVID dollars, and says that they had a $700 million fiscal cliff for this year, but then they revised that down to $200+ million, and the state of Illinois decided to go ahead and give them $1.5 billion. And not just the tax increases, the sales tax, which you heard the hospitality group say that that prospect on top of the prospect of an alcohol tax in Chicago is going to make a tax on this product like 15+% or something. And that's just, wow. What that means for people looking to go to Chicago and just have a good time. It's going to be pretty expensive, especially when you're having to pay that much tax. But the Chicago mayor, obviously at the helm of trying to piece together a spending plan before the end of the month. And I think that's important here. We got less than 2 weeks before the end of the month that they have to have a budget in place. And by law, it has to be a balanced budget. What happens if they don't get that in place? Here's the mayor getting fielded that question.
Can you give us a better picture of however we get there if there is not a budget? What happens on January 1st? Are city workers told not to show up, or are they told to show up and you're going to work without pay for a while? Just a better sense of like logistically what happens without a budget.
December 30th is the date. By close of business on December 30th, we have to have a balanced budget. In the absence of the balanced budget, we have to then give notice to every collective bargaining agreement holder, which is 40 plus, that we don't have a balanced budget. Come January 1st, in the absence of a balanced budget, we cannot remunerate, we can't pay people, we can't meet our contractual obligations, if they're open bonding obligations, our property tax levy, which is tied to a balanced budget, all of that and more descends. We provide water to a host of suburbs. There have to be people in place to provide that work. If there's no money to pay, then those individuals are not in place. So we then move into a category called essential worker designation. And even in the instance of an essential worker, you still have to pay them. And there would have to be, those individuals will be working without pay until such time that we have a balanced budget.
You know, it's very similar to the government shutdown in the federal government. You got essential workers. Some may get paid, others not. How is that going to impact city operations with a variety of things, including things not impacting the city? As you just heard, with water, the city helps supply some neighboring jurisdictions. We'll be watching this closely. I know the holiday's coming up, right? Next week, there's going to be a lot of people just tuning out, but we're going to be tuning in to make sure that you're up to date. So stay with us here with Illinois in Focus. Our reporter, Jim Talamonte, at the Center Square is on top of this. We'll have to bring him on to talk more about this, maybe sometime this week, and get into the nitty-gritty of city operations and its impact on you, the taxpayer. Governor J.B. Pritzker yesterday in Chicago, surrounded by supporters of a bill that's passed in fall veto session in October, dealing with mass transit and a $1.5 billion cost for ratepayers and taxpayers and even people who never get on mass transit. Good morning. I'm Greg Bishop. It's Illinois in Focus Daily with the Center Square. You can go to thecentersquare.com/Illinois and get headlines on what's going on in the land of Lincoln. I edit the Illinois page. We got a great team with Jim Talamonte and other contributors, but also go to thecentersquare.com where you can see a lot of other stories, including national headlines. But let's get into it. Fall veto session, pretty impactful. Several major pieces of legislation passed, and the governor's signed practically all of them. Last I checked yesterday afternoon, 2 remain on his desk. One of them we'll talk about in the next segment concerning energy. But a big controversy going into fall veto session was what are legislators going to do about the mass transit fiscal cliff that we were told about for a year and a half or so. And that mass transit fiscal cliff was upwards to $700+ million, we were told, by the Regional Transit Authority and others. That number was revised downward to about $200 million. Regardless of that, legislators went ahead and approved, and the governor signed yesterday, the mass transit bill that Republicans say is a bailout. Here's the headline from the Center Square's Jim Talamonte. Pritzker signs $1.5 billion transit bill, raising taxes and tolls. So Senate Bill 2111. The measure establishes the Northern Illinois Transit Authority, replacing the Regional Transit Authority that oversees Chicago Transit Authority, Metro, and Pace. Now, the governor promised that Illinois is on the verge of a world-class transit system. The bill passed after more than 2 years of discussions around that fiscal cliff. But the measure that ultimately passed and the governor signed, it's $1.5 billion, despite last summer, the number being revised down to $250 million. Legislators still wanted a, quote, world-class transit system, so $1.5 billion. The measure allows for the Regional Transit Authority to raise sales taxes by 0.25 percentage point across 6 Chicago area counties, generating about $478 million annually. You have the measure also, $860 million in annual transit funding expected to go from a diversion of the state's motor fuel tax. 85% of the diversion would go to the Northern Illinois Transit Authority, with the other 15% going for downstate transit. And this is where you have a lot of opposition during the passage of this that legislators were critical of, saying that it's not fair to downstate. Governor Pritzker, he addressed this yesterday in a question he was asked.
I will say that we have put more money into downstate roads than we have into the Chicago area roads, much more than historically. That's just been the way it is since we passed Rebuild Illinois. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't address the concerns of downstate members, but to be frank with you, there has been a significant shift of dollars to downstate. If you drive around downstate, anybody, the folks who are here from downstate would see that the orange cones are even more prolific in many areas downstate than they are. I'm looking at Tim Dre, he drives it all the time. So, you know, we definitely are looking at ways that we can turn the dials and make it better for downstate, but I think we've done a lot already.
So the governor defending the what critics call a sweeping of the road fund, and really what it's doing is it's taking interests from the road fund, which is a pretty healthy fund, given that the state of Illinois has doubled the gas tax and has increased it ever since 2019 every year practically, except for a few moments, I believe, during the pandemic where legislators froze that gas tax increase. But it goes up annually as well, pegged to inflation. So obviously we have a very large road fund, and the interest off of investments in the road fund are going to partially be swept to pay for mass transit. Questions about the lockbox amendment. Several years ago, voters in Illinois approving a constitutional amendment to the state constitution that says any money that's collected via tax for the roads is meant only for the roads. Well, is transit and mass transit considered part of that? And I think that, there's going to be some questions on all of that, no doubt. But next up, you've got issues about governance, right? Because there was a lot of pushback about, hey, governance structure needs to change with the mass transit. There's too many, fiefdoms, some would say, where they have special interests, and there's not enough representation to be whole and have everybody fairly treated when it comes to mass transit. And there's all these different things. If you want to get on a bus and get on a train, you got to have different apps, and they want to consolidate all this. But the governance also showed some problems with an Office of Executive Inspector General report that showed that investigations of the Transit Authority paying $1 million over 5 years to employees that were not working. So what other problems are there with the governance? The governor said that this measure is going to help with that.
Well, the governance structure is much different. You heard some of the speakers talk about the reforms. You heard Leader Buckner talk about how reforms had to come first, and indeed, they made sure that happened in the House. We had so many negotiators at the table making sure that we were going to have oversight for these various agencies, because we're trying to integrate and become one system. So I believe that we're going to have a much better system that will serve the people of northern and central and southern Illinois, but particularly in NEDA, we're going to have a system that needs together these various agencies and the needs of the people who live in the Northern Illinois region.
Again, NEDA is the Northern Illinois Transit Authority, now newly created with this legislation that the governor signed yesterday. Governor also talking about tolls and the possibility that drivers are going to see higher tolls now, and they're going to ultimately be paying for some mass transit. He works to clarify that.
To the extent, by the way, the increase in the toll is something that the toll authority has announced is in their purview. It's within their authority and not the legislature. And we made it clear in the legislation that it is a little bit unclear whether the legislature has the ability or doesn't with an independent agency like the toll authority. And the toll authority has exerted itself on that topic. I will point out, though, that the toll authority, in order to do the upgrades and significant new building that it needs to do, would have to, we haven't raised tolls in the state of Illinois, they haven't for quite some time. So there was probably going to be something from the toll authority in order to meet the new plan that is being put forward by them, I think, over the next 6 to 12 months. So it really, it's a little bit unrelated to the legislation, to be frank, in terms of how we're going to pay for the transit system that we all really want. Again, that really is a separate matter.
Not unrelated to the legislation is the road fund money. Again, the governor was asked separately about that for a second time, especially with the considerations of other roads that people pay gas taxes for. Why should some of that money be going towards things they're not going to use, like mass transit?
Yeah, it's not diverting. This is, I mean, I want to point out that we've got sales tax on motor fuel that I think there was a willingness on the part of all the parties to understand that we have to do something in transit, that those dollars were being moved over by the legislature. It was not a part of the Safe Roads Amendment. The legislature had chosen to move it over, I think, beginning back in 2019. And instead, the common understanding was this is something that really needs to go to rebuilding transit systems all across the state of Illinois. So that's really what that diversion, as you're calling it, is about.
How this is going to play out with tolls and taxes and more costs for you on the roads to pay for mass transit that some would argue has been poorly managed. President Donald Trump addressing affordability as he talked to the nation in prime time last night, while Governor J.B. Pritzker in the state of Illinois, which has the highest property taxes in the country and the second highest gas taxes and corporate taxes among the highest, and all kinds of spending that's at record levels year after year under Pritzker's watch, and more tax increases on the way for transit. Governor Pritzker blasting the president, saying that things are less affordable under President Donald Trump. It is Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop with you each and every weekday morning. Be sure to get the headlines in your inbox at thecentersquare.com. Again, thecentersquare.com. All right, so last night, President Donald Trump delivered around an 18-minute speech to the nation in prime time, and he talked about affordability. He talked about the border. He talked about the economy. He talked about tariffs, and he also talked about a bonus going to members of the military worth $1,776. And that, of course, is 1776, being the birthday of this country with the Declaration of Independence, and next year in 2026, celebrating the 250th birthday of the U.S. So the president seeming to come out of the gates talking about affordability. And after the speech, you have Governor J.B. Pritzker, who some say he's looking to make a bid for the White House in 2028, responding. So let's go ahead and hear some of what the president had to say last night in prime time about a variety of things, including showing some graphs comparing the Biden administration with the Trump administration when it comes to wage growth.
Years of record-setting falling incomes, our policies are boosting take-home pay at a historic pace. Under Biden, real wages plummeted by $3,000. Under Trump, the typical factory worker has seen a wage increase of $1,300. For construction workers, it's $1,800. It's $3,300. And for the first time in years, wages are rising much faster than inflation. Remember that. Wages are going up much faster than inflation. Very importantly, there are more people working today than at any time in American history, and 100% of all jobs created since I took office have been in the private sector.
So Trump talking about inflation and wage growth. He also talked about the tariffs that have been pretty controversial and being considered by the U.S. Supreme Court.
Already, I've secured a record-breaking $18 trillion of investment into the United States, which means jobs, wage increases, growth, factory openings, and far greater national security. Much of this success has been accomplished by tariffs. My favorite word, tariffs, which for many decades have been used successfully by other countries against us, but not anymore. Companies know that if they build in America, there are no tariffs, and that's why they're coming home to the USA in record numbers.
So you got the president talking about tariffs and how that's bringing companies back to the United States to set up manufacturing centers and so much more. He also talked about energy prices that he says in his 11 months in office for his second non-consecutive term, he's brought down energy prices.
On day one, I declared a national energy emergency. Gasoline is now under $2.50 a gallon in much of the country. In some states, it, by the way, just hit $1.99 a gallon. And within the next 12 months, we will have opened 1,600 new electrical generating plants, a record, and it's a record that won't be beaten by practically, I would say, by anybody. Or certainly not very soon. Prices on electricity and everything else will fall dramatically.
Now, prices of electricity in Illinois on the rise. You've got more policies focused on so-called green energy, clean energy, or renewable energy. And the bill on the governor's desk that opponents say is going to increase the cost of energy even more in Illinois. Illinois has high gas taxes, second highest in the nation. And if you drive across this border into Missouri or Indiana or Kentucky, you'll likely see cheaper gas prices. That's because Illinois tax on like 40 plus cents to every gallon. That's on top of the federal gas tax. Plus, Illinois has a sales tax on top of the gas tax. So Illinois, while you've got policies that the state has put in place, that's causing energy prices in the state within its borders to increase. But across the country, Trump's saying that it's a different story. We'll get to what Governor J.B. Pritzker had to say in an email last night from his campaign, not from his official office, but from his campaign. So obviously it's political. But here's the president talking about health care and how he says that's next on his plate to tackle.
It's the Unaffordable Care Act, and everybody knew it. Again, I want the money to go directly to the people so you can buy your own health care. You'll get much better health care at a much lower price. The only losers will be insurance companies that have gotten rich and the Democrat Party, which is totally controlled by those same insurance companies. They will not be happy, but that's okay with me because you, the people, are finally going to be getting great health care at a lower cost.
So the president talking about healthcare, talking about the economy. He also touched on immigration and border security. But before that, let's go to what the governor had to say from his campaign in an email. He says that President Donald Trump spent 18 minutes boasting about delivering on the economy, despite the fact, the governor says, that all he's delivered is higher prices, stagnant wage growth, and extreme uncertainty for American families. And the governor says the Illinois GOP is letting him get away with it. Quote, Donald Trump's primetime address celebrating his failing economy was an insult to the millions of Americans spending more than ever on their groceries, electric bills, and health care. The truth is, Trump doesn't care how much working people spend at the grocery store. He cares about the corporations and secret donors funding his new ballroom, the governor says. He shares some statistics. Says the numbers speak for themselves. Claims that energy prices are up 13% since Trump took office. Wage growth is at its lowest point since May of 2021. Pritzker says consumer debt is at an all-time high. Unemployment's at a 4-year high as of November 25. Grocery prices have increased overall since he took office, despite him saying otherwise. While nearly half of Americans already report difficulty paying their health care, Trump and his allies are doubling the cost for millions of Americans. And due in part to his tariffs, the U.S. has lost tens of thousands of manufacturing jobs just this year. Governor Pritzker continues from his campaign office. Anyone hoping tonight's address would recognize the realities that families are facing must be disappointed. Trump has no intention of righting the ship. In fact, he's doubling down on policies that are failing families in Illinois. Some Republicans across the country are finally waking up to the MAGA spell. Pritzker says. He says that Trump's already faced political setbacks. The Indiana GOP bucked him on his redistricting efforts. House Republicans voted to release the Epstein files after Trump fought to conceal them, which, by the way, apparently those are going to be coming out tomorrow by the law that Congress passed. So we'll see exactly what comes out there. Voters, even in Republican strongholds, have handed Trump and his party a string of embarrassing election defeats. Pritzker goes on to say, but the Illinois GOP is still backing him 100%, no matter how much it costs working families in our state. The question is, will Illinois Republicans stand up with Trump as their constituents suffer, or will they actually stand up and tell him to stop destroying the economy? The Illinois GOP needs to make a choice. Buck Trump now, or own the havoc he's wreaking on everyday working people in Illinois. So that's the governor's response. Now, I would imagine there's going to be people out there essentially plucking apart what the governor said there and holding up a mirror saying, look at Illinois. Illinois' unemployment rate is higher than the national average, always seems to be the case. Illinois traditionally takes longer to recover from economic downturns like the housing crisis in 2008 and 2009, like the COVID pandemic took us longer than most of the country to rebound to get to the job levels pre-COVID. You have the high cost of energy, and it continues to increase more so than other states. You've got high gas taxes. You've got record level government spending in the state. You've got the state of Illinois with the lowest credit rating of all states, and that's despite having multiple, modifications of the state's credit rating. You've got the highest, pension liability around, with the taxpayer cost thousands of dollars just for paying the pensions of people who are no longer working as public sector employees in Illinois. You've got just a whole host of it, including Illinois' migrant sanctuary policies, which we'll touch on in the next segment. But back to President Trump talking about border security. He says that his administration's getting it in order.
Our border was open, and because of this, our country was being invaded by an army of 25 million people, many who came from prisons and jails, mental institutions, and insane asylums. They were drug dealers, gang members, and even 11,888 murderers, more than 50% of whom killed more than one person. This is what the Biden administration allowed to happen to our country, and it can never be allowed to happen again.
And Trump went on to talk about the improvements he's made.
Starting on day one, I took immediate action to stop the invasion of our southern border. For the past 7 months, 0 illegal aliens have been allowed into our country, a feat which everyone said was absolutely impossible. Do you remember when Joe Biden said that he needed Congress to pass legislation to help close the border? He was always blaming Congress and everyone else. As it turned out, we didn't need legislation. We just needed a new president. We inherited the worst border anywhere in the world, and we quickly turned it into the strongest border in the history of our country. In other words, in a few short months, we went from worst to best.
And the president talking about trying to combat plunder of American resources by individuals with bad intentions.
Look at Minnesota, where Somalians have taken over the economics of the state and have stolen billions and billions of dollars from Minnesota and indeed from the United States of America. And we're going to put an end to it. For so long as before my election, the vast majority of good and decent Americans were forced to watch as corrupt politicians plundered the halls of power, exploited our taxpayers, and pillaged every system that makes civilized society function. But not anymore, and you see that every day, not anymore. We're putting America first, and we are making America great again.
And he also had a message for members of the military. You're getting a bonus.
Because of tariffs, along with the just passed One Big Beautiful Bill, tonight I am also proud to announce that more than 1,450,000, think of this, 1,450,000 military service members will receive a special, we call Warrior Dividend before Christmas, a Warrior Dividend. In honor of our nation's founding in 1776, we are sending every soldier $1,776. Think of that. And the checks are already on the way. Nobody understood that one until about 30 minutes ago. We made a lot more money than anybody thought because of tariffs, and the bill helped us along. Nobody deserves it more than our military, and I say congratulations to everybody. And by the way, we now have record enlistment in our military, and last year we had among the worst recruitment numbers in our military's history.
And
what a difference a year makes.
That's the president's just highlights from his address, and of course sharing with you what Governor J.B. Pritzker had to say. And if you look at statements from Illinois' congressional delegation, you can pretty much come to a conclusion that it's partisan, right? Democrats blasted the president, Republicans praised the president. And we're going to be wrapping up the year here in 2025, ushering in 2026, which is an election year, midterm elections coming up. And how all the numbers are going to shake out, what the economy is going to look like over the next 8 months or so. Pretty fascinating. But here in Illinois, we've got less than 3 months before the March primary, where Republicans are going to select their Republican candidates and Democrats are going to select their Democrat candidates before the November election. So we've got a lot to cover. The cost of goods, the cost of energy, the cost of taxes, all things on Illinoisans' minds as we wrap up the year heading into 2026. And one thing that a lot of people still very much concerned about is energy prices. Well, the governor, he says that energy is up under Trump, but Trump says energy is coming down. What are others saying about all of this, and how are Illinois policies impacting consumer prices? All right, go to thecentersquare.com where you can get the headlines in your inbox each and every weekday morning, and you can also wake up with us here for Illinois in Focus Daily. It's Friday. Programming notes, I am going to be taking the final week of the year off, and next week is going to be a slow week. We'll have some pre-recorded stuff and some best of stuff available, but we won't be live. All right, so just be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell here for the Center Square. All right, but let's get into the conversation about price. All right, so earlier this week, President Donald Trump addressed the nation saying prices are coming down. Governor J.B. Pritzker, through his political campaign, put out a statement saying no, prices are going up. One thing that we could probably point to, something that's on the face of the gas pump when you go and fill up, is the price of gas. A lot of states have gas under $3 on average. Illinois, not in that category. We're still struggling with gas over $3. And with the back and forth between Trump and Pritzker about price, I reached out to Republican State Representative Brad Halbrook, and he said, gas prices are an issue.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is I've traveled across the district this week and all fall. We have seen some pockets where gasoline at the pump is as low as I've seen it in a long time. One end of the district in the mid 240s up to mid to upper 270s, maybe a few in the low 280s. So, in kind of central and east central Illinois, we've seen prices, or the prices that we're seeing now, I've not seen in a long time. And to think if we had not doubled the gas tax in 2019, we would see prices another 30 cents or so less than that. I mean, we could see some prices in the 215, 220 range if it wasn't for the gas tax doubled.
Yeah, and that gas tax doubling in 2019, adding to the cost of gas in Illinois. State Senator Selena Villanueva also sharing her thoughts on the price in Illinois and just how everybody's cognizant of it.
Something like, look, we're always thinking about the realities of everyday life and the affordability of everyday life for people. Like, that's a constant thing, I think, for us in Springfield is, like, are things actually affordable? And so the reality is, it's always a constant conversation. I can't tell you that it's not. I can't tell you that it always is a conversation. So whether it's that, property taxes, whether it's the cost of eggs, whether, again, we're bringing in a business into the state of Illinois for there to be jobs available for people. Like, we're constantly having those conversations.
Now, the governor said that under Trump, consumer prices going up and up and up and up, even though Trump's been in office for less than a year now. And a lot of the major inflation that happened during the Biden administration. And you didn't necessarily hear the level of criticism about increase in prices during the Biden administration from establishment media. And the governor, I don't really recall him too much really going after the Biden administration for increased prices. But he's going after the Trump administration for increased prices, even though inflation has cooled off a bit. And economists watching that number very closely. And State Representative Brad Halbrook says the governor's just wrong on what's driving the cost here.
Yeah, well, the governor is going to say what he wants to say and needs to say to try to be politically relevant. He just has difficulty grappling with the truth. He has trouble grappling with the president. He needs to work with the president. The president has some good ideas. They need to get the situation in Chicago and wherever else in the state on the illegal aliens, the violent criminals. They need to get that situation under control. And why the governor is just resistant and hesitant to that is beyond common logical sense thinking.
Halbrook also saying that, the high costs of things are really due to Pritzker policies and tax increases that we've seen time and time again.
Right. I mean, we've got the highest property taxes in the nation. This gas tax is second or third highest in the nation. The list, corporate income tax is right up there in the top 2 or 3. All these costs that are all policy driven that the governor has advocated for, these things lie at his feet, and how he can blame the Trump administration for them I don't understand that.
And we've got,
other than that's just Governor Pritzker doing what he does.
We've got the recent reports about energy prices, and we talked about that this week as well, with the manufacturers coming out saying they need to reverse course. There's red flag warnings about high prices, higher demand, and lower reliability, with the inference that the focus of renewables is not going to cut it for the demand that's coming. And that energy price debate very much the forefront of Representative Halbrook, who's in the southern Illinois area and has manufacturers and farmers and consumers that are being impacted by these high prices.
Well, policy's driving it. Illinois deregulated electric generation and transmission in '97, and over the last few years, they've tried to re-regulate it in favor of alternatives, to phase out coal and natural gas in favor of wind and solar. And now we're seeing the onset of battery storage. And these things are all real expensive, and they're really slow to deploy, coupled with the fact that they're unreliable. But generators are making decisions, long-term financial decisions, and they see that their facilities are due to be closed because of these emission standards. And it's just economically unfeasible for them to stay in business because of the policy.
And Halbrook also highlighting a recent report from the Illinois Power Agency and Illinois Environmental Protection Agency and the Illinois Commerce Commission, talking about studying power availability and making projections into the future, saying that we could have energy shortages by 2029 for major parts of the state if the state continues on its trajectory, including the decarbonization efforts of closing power plants. Plus, you've got the Citizens Utility Board saying that, listen, even though some rate requests from utilities are getting slashed, you're still going to see higher rates in Illinois, again, with the energy plan that's in place right now.
Right. I think that's what's really telling in the report is the plan's not working. Things are just not happening as quick as they need to. Again, this is what we've said since 2021. These are not well thought out plans. They're not well orchestrated. You can't just arbitrarily set dates for closure without having a plan that will work and get us to that point. They've moved the target on the renewables 2 or 3 times over the last several years. And I don't see how that we're going to get there. And I think that report tells that very succinctly. And so they've already predicted higher rates for next summer. And so we see with the onset of the data centers, the high demand that they have for energy, there's nothing been legislated that is going to make rates cheaper, even though that's what we've been told. We're not seeing it, and the report tells that story.
Clearly, you've got independent oversight of energy and the costs, while the legislature is passing legislation to put more policies in place and more regulation in place that's focused on so-called green energy or renewable energy. Illinois House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch, talking to the Center Square up in Chicago earlier this week, reacting to that report from the Illinois Power Agency and the Environmental Protection Agency and the Commerce Commission about how Illinois could see a shortage. Is it time to maybe reverse course on the closure of base load generation through coal and natural gas powered plants? Here's the speaker.
Listen, in 2021, we passed transformative energy legislation in CEJA in 2021, and here we were 4 years later. We passed another omnibus energy bill that people tell me is transformative. I'm looking forward to the governor putting his signature on it. But all of my experts around the table say, we're going to be back at the table. We're going to continue to look to ways to make things better. And I'm listening to those experts. But I got to tell you, the bill that the governor is going to put his signature on, people say it's going to help this state in the short term and in the long term. It's going to bring costs down. It goes directly to our affordability issue under this president. Since day one, we've seen prices continue to go up in the energy space rather than down. But in Illinois, because of the work we did in veto session, we're going to bring those prices down with the policies that we're putting in place.
Don't know if that's necessarily what the report that came out this week about the resource adequacy study from the Illinois Commerce Commission and Environmental Protection Agency and others. And that resource adequacy study says that there's going to be shortages and the demand is going to exceed the supply. And that means there's going to be higher costs on consumers, things that have been, red flag warnings for all kinds of industries like the manufacturers and such. But Speaker Welch saying that they are going to continue conversations about this stuff. You got State Representative Halbrook saying he hopes that the Speaker is genuine.
Well, the short answer is yes, and I hope that the Speaker is sincere. I mean, he has a hard time, I think, sometimes with the way his talking points or his ideology and reality. It's one thing, so I hope the governor signs it, but then we need to get back to the table to, okay, how many times are we going to try to fix CEJA? How many times are we going to try to fix FEJA? Whatever the case might be, how many times are we going to offer up these different fixes? And so, you have these several 100-page, 1,000-page bills that just make the situation absolutely worse. And I'm really glad to hear that the manufacturers are out. They were out this summer with a statement that said this was going to be $1 trillion expense to electrify Illinois by, I think it was 2050 or 2045, $1 trillion added expense. I mean, one manufacturer, small business that I talked to in September in the district, he has a business in 2 locations, Same period over last year, his electric bill jumped from $40,000 to $109,000. That's just not sustainable. They may be profitable, but I can't believe that their $69,000 additional expense a month profitable.
So with the law on the governor's desk to invest more ratepayer subsidies into battery storage and expectations that he's going to sign that, what does that mean for legislators when they come back to the Capitol in late January? Are they really going to hunker down and start figuring out how they can shore up the prices and that's increasing this summer when that's the expectation? Are they going to maybe take a look at reversing that closure date for coal-fired and natural gas power plants by 2045? We'll be watching. That's why you need to subscribe to Illinois in Focus, the podcast with you each and every morning. Also, you've got the newsletter through thecentersquare.com. Go to the Illinois page and sign up for the newsletter today. It is Illinois in Focus, only with the Center Square.